Thank you so much, Kara, for coming on to SheLeads. I am so excited to get to know you, hear your story, and just talk to you more. So thank you for coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Kara, you are the founder of Hint. It's a healthy lifestyle company best known for Hint water, which is very good for whoever hasn't tried it. And beyond even Hint, you're also a keynote speaker for top executives, top companies like Google, LinkedIn, Oracle, the list goes on. And even beyond that, you've also received so many accolades, including Fast Company's most creative people in business and Fortune's most powerful women entrepreneurs. So I can't think of a better guest to have on SheLeads, and I'm just so
Oh,
honored.
that's so nice. Thank you.
Yeah, so first, I obviously want to hear the story behind Hint, because especially I know you worked at AOL leading the e-commerce business and you did sales at CNN. So did you always have that entrepreneurial itch, or did you know you wanted to start something eventually, or just how did it come about?
Yeah, so I never really knew that I wasn't the type of entrepreneur. I've met people today who have said, "Oh, I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur." I never really actually said that. But now when I look back, it's so much easier to say, of course, I was ultimately, going to do what not necessarily a beverage company or a healthy lifestyle company, but something, that was disruptive, something that was new and different. Because I think that the key thing for me was I was just always curious, like ever since I was a little kid. And, I was never afraid of failure. I was actually an athlete as well. I was a gymnast. And I just, I was always going out and trying things and seeing what would happen. And you mentioned I was at AOL prior to starting Hint. And I think for me, I had never really grown up thinking that I would run a beverage company or a CPG company. It was after AOL and I had left, I'd had a few kids, and I actually was pregnant with my third child when I started to really think about Hint, but didn't really think about it until I was trying to get healthy. And I was taking a couple of years off in between Hint or in between AOL and Hint. And I was, I sort of look back and laugh at it. And I think probably some people relate to this, that I knew how to work out and sort of get myself back in shape.
Yeah.
And so I was, running and exercising and eating right. But this store, I mean, this was, a little over 15 years ago, had, cropped up in San Francisco where I lived at the time. And it was called Whole Foods. And so I thought, if I start shopping at Whole Foods and I'm working out every day, then I'm going to get healthy. And it's all just poof, going to be magic, and I'm going to be healthy. And what I realized is that there were just so many things inside the store that were not, not everything is healthy, right? In the stores. And so for me, I started, reading labels. That was really kind of the original time when I started okay, I need to be a little careful, maybe organic sugar is better than regular sugar, but I just still need to really pay attention to what these words are and what these ingredients are that I'm ultimately consuming. And so what I figured out was that I had through these pregnancies, I had gained a bunch of weight. I never had a problem losing weight over the years, but I'd also developed terrible adult acne, which I never even had as a teenager. And lots of my energy levels were down and I wasn't sleeping right, all these things. And so I really assumed that it was because of something I was eating or I wasn't working out enough or something. And then one day I was looking at, one of my favorite things that, again, I had sort of given a pass to it, not really even thinking that it was, any problem with it at all. And I thought it was relatively healthy, a product called Diet Coke. And I used to drink, lots of Diet Coke while I was training, growing up. I grew up in Arizona. I should have been drinking a lot more water, but I wasn't drinking water. I was just drinking Diet Coke. And I was drinking between 8 and 12 a day, which sounds like it was a lot, but it sounds totally crazy. I mean, the Coke people have told me that, you know, I was definitely a big user of the product, but it wasn't totally unheard of, right? And so I didn't understand all of the ingredients in, you know, in Diet Coke. And so I thought maybe I should just put this to the side for now and see if I can, you know, just stop drinking it and see if there's any change. Never did I think that that was really going to be the core of what my issue was. And so I, you know, threw it in the garbage. I didn't go down to drinking like one a day or anything because I thought I'll just miss it too much. So I'm just going to go cold turkey and not drink it. And this first, like that first week was really hard. I'm not going to lie. Like it was like, I wanted it so bad. And I'm like, no, I've just got to say no. And, you know, the athlete in me was like, I've got to focus. I'm going to be really grumpy about it, but I've just like got to focus and not do it. And so once I got through week one, then week two, I started seeing that my skin was clearing up, my energy levels were clearing up, and my clothes were fitting differently. And so I ended up jumping on the scale and saw that I had lost in 2.5 weeks, I had lost 24 pounds, and which was nuts. And, you know, ultimately in 6 months of sort of living this way, I'd given up Diet Coke altogether. I realized a lot of other things that I used to like have a Diet Coke and then 2 hours later, I'd be super hungry for like a piece of candy or a piece of gum or something. It was constantly getting me to crave other things. And so while I wasn't eating like, you know, 10 cupcakes a day, my, you know, insulin was probably, you know, really being challenged. And ultimately, you know, I always tell people now, the more I know about, you know, the body and sort of your organs, it's like, you know, maybe I learned it when I was a kid growing up. I wasn't a science major, but I, you know, felt like I was suddenly, you know, the fact that I was breaking out and that I was having this issue was like my body actually telling me through the largest organ that there was a problem, right? So, so I started, like, I spent, you know, the next year, right? After 6 months, like I said, I lost 55 pounds. My skin issues were gone, you know, and that's a lot of weight. Like people were really noticing, like, they're like, are you okay? You know, wow, you look like a totally different person. And I would tell people like I had given up this diet soda. And I started to really think about the fact that even if it wasn't diet soda, maybe it was, you know, like a, I don't know, maybe it was a low fat yogurt, or maybe it was a, you know, vitamin water, or I started thinking about all of these words that as consumers, we have to make decisions on and potentially purchase these products or consume these products or whatever. And I thought, you know, it's really pretty crazy how we're marketed to. And people buy diet, they buy, you know, vitamin, they buy all of these things, assuming that they're going to get health from it. And in many cases, they're willing to pay more, you know, for those products because they're like, oh, they're better for me. Like everything's great. And, you know, I just, again, maybe I just had too much time on my hands because I wasn't, you know, working at AOL anymore, but I just thought like, that's just really sad. You know, when somebody's trying really hard to change their health and, you know, do something better for themselves or for their family, like it just shouldn't be that hard, right? And then I started looking at my own life around, you know, how I should have been drinking a lot more water. I knew water was better for me and I aspired to drink water, but I just never did it. Like if somebody handed me, you know, a bottle of water, maybe I would drink a few sips and then I'd put it to the side. And, you know, I wouldn't sit there and focus on drinking all the water all the time. And so I had gotten to a point where I was drinking, you know, 8+ glasses of water a day, but I was practically lining them up on the counter, you know, making sure that every night before I went to bed, I drank this water, and sort of a weird, you know, it just wasn't sustainable. Like I just thought this is not going to be able to be the rest of my life. And so I thought, what's going to make me drink more water? And I had a bunch of fruit on the counter. So I sliced up the fruit, I threw it in the water, and I thought, oh, it gives me the taste of water. And then, I would put it in my, thermos, my, Sig bottle at the time. And, people would say, "Oh, what's in your water today?" And I'd be like, "Oh, it's pomegranate and raspberry." And, and so people were like, "Oh, wow, that's awesome." And, I didn't even know that it didn't have any calories. Like, that wasn't my focus. My focus was to get me to drink water and make water better tasting,
Yeah.
so that I would consume more water. And then I realized I was actually interviewing for a few tech jobs, and I was, looking at Google and Yahoo and a few others that were out there at the time. And the key reason why I didn't sort of take a role there, I lived in San Francisco and I had these young kids, and I thought to commute down to Palo Alto or Mountain View every single day is like a lot. And I just didn't want to do it. I had come off of a role at AOL where we were actually based in Washington. So I commuted on the plane, and it's just a lot. Like, I just, I had a family now. I just didn't really want to be gone that much. And I thought, I don't want to be in a car. And I mean, at that time, commuting from San Francisco to Palo Alto was maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. Now, way more, and sort of crazy traffic. But so for me, I really thought, also the fact that I never really viewed myself as, a tech executive. I think people did because I was there for 7 years.
Yeah.
But before that, I mean, I had started my career in media. I had actually, I'd been at Time, which, was considered a print publication, but I wasn't on the editorial side. I was on the circulation side. So it was very, analytical and based on consumer needs and subscriptions and stuff like that. So, and then I went on to CNN and sort of did something totally different there. And then also did ad sales as well. But I felt like, people were defining me for going, they're like, "Oh, you've spent all this, you did awesome in tech and you should go do tech again." And I thought, if I only have, I don't know, 1 or 2 more gigs in me, maybe I have 6 more gigs in me. Do I just want to do tech, or have I done tech, and why can't I go and do some other things and use my skills that I've, taught? And so for me, there was like, I had sort of solved that puzzle in my head, saying I might want to do something else besides doing AOL 2.0. And then when I was like, I'd get up every single morning and think about, this water concept. And I kept thinking that if I could actually get people to enjoy water again, then, I could do a lot. Like, I could change people's, I could change people in the US's health, and, and maybe in the world. Like, we get people to enjoy water again, instead of, trying to, trick themselves into, these products just in order to try and get healthy. And so that was kind of the thinking of it. But then, ultimately I went back to my Whole Foods in San Francisco and sort of, felt like I was educating people too about what I had found. And then people thought it was interesting. I mean, people, like, it was the merchandiser stocking the shelves at Whole Foods, and I knew everybody, like, in tech. I really just didn't know people in this like industry. And most of my friends were working while I was taking some time off too. And so that's when I thought, like, people are actually listening to me, and I don't really, like, especially then, when I had just zero experience. I didn't know how to launch a beverage. I didn't really, like, I conceptualized that I was doing something better, but I didn't really understand. I knew what had happened to me when I gave up diet sweeteners, but, I know a lot more now about sort of the dangers around it, and, and how, the decks are really stacked against people who have sort of gotten addicted, to whether it's sugar or diet sweeteners. And so I thought, if I can do that, even if it sits in my pantry and I don't do like anything else, like, with it, it's going to satisfy my curiosity to launch a product and try and get it on the market. And I wrote a little mini business plan for it, but, I can't say that I even slightly knew what I was doing, and ended up finding out when I decided to launch this beverage, I was pregnant with my son, Justin. And so, people are always asking me, like, how did you know when to launch it ultimately? And I was pregnant and I was having a C-section that day. And so I had just gotten the product like the day before, and I thought, oh, it'd be so great to sort of like at least close that chapter and try and get it on the shelf. And I'd be, it was a goal. Like, it was like, can I do that? And I ended up getting it on the shelf at Whole Foods. I sort of dropped the product. My husband came with me to drop it because he was like, you were insane. Like, you're having a baby this afternoon. And I ended up educating the guy at Whole Foods about what a planned C-section is, and told him it'd make me feel really great, like going into labor, if he actually put it on the shelf. And so I mean, it was just, I had no idea whether it was going to work or not. And then, today we're the largest independent non-alcoholic beverage in the country that doesn't have a relationship with Coke, Pepsi, or Dr. Pepper Snapple. So it's, I mean, it's pretty big. So yeah.
That's amazing.
So that's the backstory on it.
That's such a crazy story. And so I'm interested because once you stopped drinking Diet Coke and you just cut cold turkey, which already is definitely not a trait and like not an easy thing for people to do.
Yeah.
And then you started experimenting yourself because you realized, okay, water won't do it. Like, I don't want to just drink water the rest of my life. But like a lot of people have these ideas, but they don't like get started. Like, for instance, if people discovered that putting fruit in their water, like most people I would say would just continue doing that. And they wouldn't think, okay, this could be something, and this I want to share with other people. So like, what were those like first steps you took that really got you started? And like, how do kind of almost advice for people to get started?
I mean, I think that the faster you can sort of like just get something on the shelf. I mean, obviously in the case of beverages, you have to make sure that it's safe for the consumer, right? And that it tastes good. But I always tell people that until you actually get a consumer's reaction, like I've never been a huge believer in focus groups because I feel like they're, even if you invite people in and you don't sort of give them any clues, that they may hear other people talking and they don't make their own decisions, as compared to, if consumers are actually purchasing with their money, or, in the case of like, we're the largest beverage at Google and Facebook and lots of other companies, they're, people are actually making a decision about what they're going to be pulling off the shelf, right? And so I feel like, you need to get a product on the shelf as quick as possible, and that it's never going to be perfect, or it shouldn't be perfect. You should just get it out and just go try it. And, it's hard to say like how much money you should spend, too, because I think that just varies by category. But I think that the key thing is, figuring out what you can afford to spend, and, doing it in a way where you're still going to be able to, be alive, right? Afterwards. If this is like, I always tell people, my dad worked for a company called ConAgra, actually originally Armor Food Company, which became ConAgra, and he was the developer of a product called Healthy Choice. And so I, always think back, I used to say as a kid, a rotten kid, like I would be like, why don't you just go launch your own company? And, for him, he was a entrepreneur that really, felt like he had responsibility. And so he was, he had 5 kids, and, we were all athletes, and there were costs to being an athlete and all these things. And so, he really couldn't afford to go and be an entrepreneur by the time he decided to do it. So, I always tell people, like, you plan. If your idea is like, you've got an idea, don't be in such a hurry to get it on the market. Like, instead, just try and figure out like, what baby steps could I use in order to get it on the market. I think like that's such a key thing for, sharing with entrepreneurs. But again, like, I think that there's so many people that I have this theory, like the more educated you are too, the harder, it is to actually launch something, because you feel like there's never a good time, right?
Yeah.
And so you feel like you're not prepared and you can't get out of the gate. And so the number of people even who I've met who have been, gotten their MBA and have this amazing experience, they're terrified of sort of actually, ultimately terrified of failure. So if you're afraid of failure, I think that that's something that, you've got to sort of get to the root of why you're not okay with ultimately launching something. You've got to make a plan. So is your plan, okay, I've got to figure out how to save. My plan's going to take me this much money to sort of get it out of the gate. When I hear entrepreneurs say, oh, it's going to take me whatever, like a few $100,000 in order to get it out of the gate, I'm like, so, do you know how you're going to spend all that money? And when people say things like, oh, well, this much in marketing and this much in, it's like, no, like, how much are you really going to spend? Like, how much do you need to spend? I mean, do you need to do marketing when you're getting your product out of the gate and, having and running like the consumer test? And I think it just varies by category. But in today's day and age, I mean, the more that, you can launch a product online today. I mean, 15 years ago, you couldn't launch a beverage, or nobody was launching beverages online. So it's a very different, world. And I think in many ways, more of an opportunistic world where you can actually, I mean, you can go start a, great Instagram account, or, plug in any other social media into that, analogy. But, if you're really great at sort of like articulating your brand, I mean, it's a very cheap way. You don't have to run advertising on Facebook yet in order to get a gauge as to what this consumer, thinks about your idea or your product. Right. So I think that that's the key thing. But I don't know. I think it's also just figuring out, what is it at the core that you're afraid of? I mean, are you afraid of failure? Which I think a lot of people are. And, but I always felt like it was just, I don't know. I was always curious. I was always just going and trying things. And I think it was also, I tell people all the time, all five of us kids were athletes. We were not, necessarily the, sort of at each other's like level and stuff. There were varying levels, but we all had a different sport. And then we all like, talked to each other about our sports. And this is the way it works here, whether it was football or baseball or swimming or gymnastics or whatever. And so I think it was like the curiosity, but also that we just always just knew that we were always like doing something. Like health for me was always super important. I had sort of, when I started working, I just couldn't really find the time to kind of focus on that. But I, looking back now, I think that it was always in there somewhere. But I think that the curiosity and, just telling people to go out and try it, I think even if it fails, I mean, the number of entrepreneurs that I talk to today that, have had a failed startup, I mean, I think it's like, it's okay. I mean, again, like, are you going to be able to recover from it? What did you learn? All of those kind of things.
Yeah. I think that's so many valuable takeaways just from that. And particularly, I think it's so true. I think people just want it to be perfect, and they're waiting for it to be perfect. And they're never really satisfied to release it for other people to see because they don't think it's perfect. And then talking about failure, it's honestly been a common theme that I've had with other speakers, and how it's so important to have this, how the failure is like our own mental model. So it's how we perceive it. So like if we view it as something that is a learning opportunity, then that's great. And then we'll be more open to taking risks. So I think it's definitely important.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think that, if you don't go and start something, then you'll never know, right? I think the number of people I talk to later on in life thinking, oh, I had this idea, I should have launched it. And I think like, gosh, so you're just, bitter, like for the last like 6 years doing something that you didn't really want to do. And, I just think it's sad. It's just, if you are a huge believer that, you've got one life to live and you've got to, go and make the best of it. And I think that, you've got to figure out how to do that. And entrepreneurship also isn't for everyone too. I mean,
Mhm.
I've also talked to people who have said, oh, I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I'm like, why? Like, there's ways to make money. And, you don't,
Yeah.
it sounds super glamorous. I mean, being a college athlete sounds really glamorous, right? I'm sure, you have many stories along the way where like, yeah, it sounds cool, but, there's a lot of travel.
Yeah.
There's, a lot of stuff you miss. Like, it's the same with
Definitely.
entrepreneurism. I mean, especially, when you're leading a company too, it's like it's lonely at the top at times, right?
Yeah.
You don't have like a whole team to rely on. You're the one that's like making sure you have enough money in the bank to pay your employees,
Yeah.
and make sure that uh, Whole Foods doesn't kick you out of there, or whatever it is. Like, I think that it's a lifestyle choice. It's incredibly rewarding when it
Yeah.
goes right, but it's also, not for everybody. It's not this, like, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, great. There's like some challenges and
Yeah.
downsides to it as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I could definitely agree with the college athlete aspect because I think it's true. I think people think it's this incredible thing, and it is, and it's one of the most rewarding things ever. But I think definitely there's 100% adversity that you face and challenges,
Yeah,
and that's just life, though. I think you just learn from it and have to get back up. But I can see parallels with entrepreneurship for sure. So,
totally.
so I'd love to talk. I'd love to get your insight on being a female founder and just how has it been also like in the founding stages as a female leader at an amazing company and then also like in finding venture, was that challenging as a female, and like who have you had people in your corner to lean on, just general a female founder, any insight?
Yeah, so early on, my husband actually joined me. He's an attorney. He was an attorney at a tech company called Netscape early on, and while I was at AOL, he was there. And anyway, I think he thought it was crazy that I was launching this beverage company, and we had 4 kids under the age of 6 at the time, and so it was sort of nutty. And so he was actually taking a break. We were redoing a house in San Francisco. So he was helping me deliver cases. And that's when he was like, wait, what are you doing? Like, he was super curious and, felt sorry for me. And I needed somebody when I was taking cases to the stores. I needed somebody to stay in the car with the kids while they're in their car seats. And so he'd,
Wow.
stay in the car, or he'd go in, and, he ended up ultimately, saying like, hey, maybe I should just like work for you and do this for a while, or do this until I have another job or whatever. I was like, okay, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But so he joined me, and I always tell people, like, early on, I mean, people would say to us like, husband and wife team, how can people, how can you guys work together? Like, this is going to fail because you guys are working together. And I think now more and more people talk about husband and wife teams, that it's actually like, it's been a super great thing and somebody to really rely on. And also somebody, as my kids were growing up too, when we felt like one of our kids needed us more than the other for stuff, that there was going to be one of us saying, okay, I'm going to, do it, versus like, I hear a lot of people who are couples and they're both working parents, and they're like, well, my husband felt like his job was more important than mine, or, and so there's a lot of sacrifices like that way. And we never really had that. Instead, it was like, oh, okay, we trade off on going to, games or performances, like all of that kind of stuff. But I also feel like, the other thing that being an entrepreneur allowed us was like, we could create our own schedule. And so there was no, we were able to early on, like I'd start work like way early, even before my kids would get up. And, we had a nanny who would be in there in the morning, but she wasn't going to stay all day. So I'd sort of figure out, okay, I've got this amount of time to go and work. But then, if something came up, if the kids were sick or something, it was pretty easy for me to adjust things, and which was amazing. But I feel like, I think that those were kind of the things early on that I learned about, being an entrepreneur that I super loved. And in terms of funding, I mean, we funded the company the first couple of years. We had sort of had some savings and from both of our careers, and I sort of wanted to use that savings to actually go and start this company. I kept thinking that I was maybe going to go to business school, and maybe even like use that money to go to business school. But I also felt like if I go and start this, I'm going to learn so much along the way that I always laugh that it was like my MBA in beverages and sort of learning everything from how to make the product, distribution, and how to build a company overall. And so, but friends were always saying to us, like, hey, when you guys are doing a friends and family round, we'd love to invest like, 25,000, 50,000. I mean, it was, and I early on, I didn't really want to take that money because I felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Like I really, I mean, I didn't even know how to make this product. My husband was super instrumental in sort of the actually helping to create the product, ultimately with no preservatives in it. But the two of us were, every day just kind of racking our brains together, trying to figure out how to create this product. We, would deliver it to Whole Foods, either alone or together or whatever. And, we would limit how much we would actually deliver to Whole Foods. We tell them like, oh, we just don't have any more of that flavor. And the reality is like, we were still trying to figure out how to make it, and not just actually make it, but get it, shelf stable. Like we were not sure whether or not we had a totally shelf stable product because we weren't using preservatives. We used real fruit. So there were just so many like learnings along the way. And so finally we ended up having this family office. We had one of our investors who was one of our early distributors that we were talking to, that was, we had sort of built the company in San Francisco, and then we decided to go out to New York and Boston. New York, where my husband's from, to try and see if like we just had a San Francisco brand that people were going to buy, or was this one that would actually work on both coasts. And so we found a distributor in New York, and it was just, we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, we were just like, oh, once we launch it and we have a distributor, it'll be great. Like I always tell people now, like, I learned early on that you really have to have people, your own people, to kind of manage it and get it out there and, continue to babysit it. And, even still today, I mean, I have an amazing team of, 200 people that work for the company, but I think I can still walk into a sales meeting and, and sell this. Like I'm still very hands-on with the product. I just don't do it as much, but I can do it. I can still go and make this product. Like all along the way, I was wanting to learn those things, and I would never hand it off any part of this, to somebody else to do. Anyway, but so when we got out to the East Coast, one of our distributors introduced us to a family office out of Brussels that was the Stella Beer family. And they were really, they were seriously approaching us, trying to make sure that, or wanting to see if we would take an investment from them. And we just thought it was like, I mean, I love Stella Beer. I had like loved it forever. And I just thought, wow, like, that'd be kind of cool, to just meet them, if nothing else. I don't know if we'll actually take an investment from them. And we just really liked them a lot. And we were just like, okay, maybe we'll take, a sort of medium-sized investment. And so we did that early on. And then, it's funny. I mean, it's probably a longer story, but like, we don't have any venture capital or private equity in the company. We've gone to individuals. There's a ton of Silicon Valley people involved in the company, as well as, artists like, John Legend's an investor, his manager Ty is an investor. Like we've really, built our cap table with fans of the brand who really sort of fundamentally believed that health was a problem. Right. And that, that Hint was solving a problem for them or society as a whole. And, when we weren't even like selling the fact that we were raising money. They were coming to us and say, hey, you know, would you, you know, be interested in being involved? And so we have people, I think probably the lowest investment that we've taken early on was like $10,000 all the way up to, you know, millions of dollars.
Right.
And I feel like having those people that are just super passionate about the brand, that aren't like sitting here, you know, trying to like, you know, micromanage your business in some way, but instead, like, you know, we send everybody a couple of cases a month. They all like order more online as well. But there are, you know, influencers. There are advocates. They're really proud to like bring it to parties, you know, put it in their kids' lunch boxes, whatever, put it in their companies. And so we just kind of went that way instead of like the venture way. And I think early on, we probably would have taken money from, you know, many companies around Stanford that were, you know, sort of the typical tech investors. But the other thing that I've learned about fundraising that, you know, really nobody told me, but I fundamentally believe this, is that investors will not invest in your company if they don't believe they can add value. And a lot of them will not articulate that, right? They'll just be like, oh, it's not the right fit, or whatever. Like, you're not big enough, or, you know, the founders are married, or you're too young, or, you know, or whatever, whatever it is. I think like the core thing is that, you know, if you're pitching and you don't think that you can sort of look at an analogy on their, you know, companies that they've invested in that is close to what you're pitching, then, you know, maybe you go have a coffee with those people, just because I always feel like you learn in every single meeting. But when I hear entrepreneurs, and particularly female entrepreneurs that are, you know, meeting with somebody because they have a big venture private equity and they've never invested in seed round or A round, or, you know, they've never invested in a beverage company, or, you know, they've never invested in a pantyhose company or something, you know, like they just don't really know what to do with you, then, you know, don't give it any more than one meeting, because it's just, it's at the end of the day, I don't know why these people like have more time than you do, but you know, to have those meetings. And, you know, at times I've even told, you know, female entrepreneurs, like, I don't know, maybe they just want a lunch date and that's why they like want you, you know, to come and do this. But I think at the end of the day, you have to sort of, your time is the most valuable thing. And especially as you know, if you want to have a family, if you want to, you know, do other things, right? Work out, whatever it is, like you have to really start to look at, you know, what are the possibilities and whether or not it's really worth, you know, bringing in that kind of money. Because I think there's lots of other ways of raising money, and you know, I can't say it's easy. People always ask, is it, you know, harder to raise money as a female? I mean, I've never been a guy, so I don't know. Like, raising money is just, it's hard. It's like, it's terrible. It's the worst. And it doesn't matter what stage you're at. I think it's just something that is just, it's just a necessity, I think, for growing many, many businesses, and especially if you have a business that's scaling. But I think it's something that there's a lot of different options for different types of investors too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the approach you did. I love how you have people who are, you knew they're so passionate about it already. I think that's very telling of the people you're surrounding yourself with, and the people at Hint and everything else along with it. I'm wondering, so it seems a lot of it that you've experienced with Hint since you founded it in 2005, a lot of it is like learning by doing, and you're kind of just experimenting and the kind of learning lessons. Yeah. So I'm wondering, as you've scaled to about 200 employees, as you said, how has that experience been? And like, what were some challenges you faced that you really learned a lot? And yeah, like being a leader of a huge company, like how has that been?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the key thing is that, you know, you're always learning, right? And I think, I always push on my employees to, do something that I've learned just along the way, not only for myself, but watching other people, is that, I will not hire people in our company that I don't feel like I'm going to learn from, which is sort of counter to what, what people think, right? Like, it's like you want to hire people that you think will get a task done, right?
Yeah.
Or, might be a good cultural fit, all that. But I think for me, it's like, I always want to know, like, I used to say to my employees, like, is she or he smarter than you, right?
Yeah,
Is that like, and people would be like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, why would I hire somebody that was smarter than me? And it's like, first of all, like, I'm a huge believer that every manager should hire people that they're going to learn from, that know a little bit more than what they do. You can teach them skills on, managing and sort of teach them what you know. But unless you're like working in an environment where, where you're like learning, you're constantly learning, eventually you're going to get bored.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to be bored because you're going to be doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that, going back to being an athlete, it's something else that I learned. It's like, it's part of teamwork, right? You have an appreciation, maybe not originally, like when you're first starting, you sit there and look at those people that you're playing with and you just kind of hate them because they're better than you, right? And then after a while, you just realize that, hey, like, I got something too, and I want to work with people that do this really well, right? And I think that's true for like all aspects of life, right? You want to bring, you want to be able to work with people that you feel like they're bringing you up in ways too. And that you may never have the same skills. You may never learn everything that they do, but I think that that's such a key thing. And I, really try and teach that internally to people, because I think it's a little different aspect than what, maybe other companies kind of emphasize, right? Like, just because you're a manager, like, I always, I really think that that's something that you should be, it's a goal, right? And I think it's also, you're going to be interviewing for jobs going out there. Like, I always say to people that, it's getting your foot in the door, but I think it's also kind of sharing, understanding kind of where you're interviewing for a job, and like really understanding, like, what are your pain points? Like, what are the things that, you wish you could get done? Like, I mean, are there 3 priorities that you think, like, you would love to get done? And like, and I think that the ideal candidate will be able to say with confidence, like, I think I can get those things done, but then I can also do these other things. Like, let's just say that you're getting hired to, be a product manager, for example, and, you understand that it's an entry level job that you're interviewing for, but then also maybe you highlight, I remember I had this project in school, and, and the key thing that I learned about this was this, and, and the aspects that I didn't have, I was like willing to, like, it was great because I worked with a team of people that actually had those aspects. So I learned a lot, but then I was also able to bring in, my writing skills and my, organizational skills and things like that to be able to sort of like sell yourself into those, into making them recognize that you've got these other skills.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I don't know who I heard this from, but very similar to what you said about hiring people who you can learn from, but who are smarter than you. Because I think that's ultimately, like, you don't want to be the absolute best in a way. Like, you want to be able to learn and everyone contribute to each other. It doesn't have to be this hierarchical structure. So I think
and it happens at every single age. I mean, the leaders that, I probably admire the most are the ones that, have people or had people on their teams that were just like rock stars, right? And I think like that's the key, is that it's like, you don't have to be, I also just don't think that you just have to be like a good manager, right? I think it's like, you have you're a good manager and you're really good at X. But you're good at sort of recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses, and you're recognizing, pulling those people together. But I think it takes a unique candidate, and sort of interviewing too, to be able to pull that kind of stuff, out of a person interviewing you, to say like, what are the things that like you wish you had on the team?
Right.
And I think that you don't have to like be like, oh, I'm awesome at all of that. Like, I think it's just like, of those three things, I think my biggest strength would be this. And here's like, and if the person says like, well, what is, why do you think that? And then you can go into sort of an example, like, or, whatever. Like, I mean, I don't think you ever would have like gone to played soccer at Stanford if you didn't feel like there was just like an amazing group of 100%. People that were on that team, right? And pretty quickly you figured out who had strengths and who had, like, you can call them weaknesses or challenges or whatever. And I think that that's the thing, that you want to work in a team where you're constantly learning. And I think it's the same thing for people once they get into a role too, that it's, if you start to get bored and you start to really like understand kind of what you're doing, and maybe you allow yourself to not coast, but sort of like be in that spot for a while.
Right.
But I think that you should constantly be challenging yourself. And I think that that's what startups allow people to do. That unfortunately, I think that if you go into a large company, right out of school, and like a training program or something, I think that there's some really good aspects to that. But so often you get kind of, once you end up even getting out of the training program, you get plugged into like, maybe it's accounting, for example. Like, we have a guy who was in a training program that he ended up coming into Hint, and he was in finance. And then what he realized is that he didn't aspire to be a CFO. Like, he didn't know what a CFO really did when he was in school. But when he started like being in the workplace and kind of seeing it in a large company and seeing it in a small company, he just didn't want to do that with his life. But he thought like he had great skills, and then actually he saw that my husband, who's our chief operating officer, was, doing a lot of stuff around supply chain that really needed a lot of analytics and sort of like, kind of more what if scenarios. And so he appreciated the puzzle. He appreciated sort of, that side of the business. And he wanted to work for somebody that he was going to learn from. So he was able to actually shift from, finance into supply chain with those skills. And, he's been leading our supply chain now for a few years. And I think it's like, I think at some point, you find the people that you're going to learn from, and that just never goes away. If you don't have somebody that you're learning from, then I think it's probably okay to take a first job from somebody that you kind of feel like you'd like to work with and you'd learn from. But, maybe thinking like your long-term plan is really to find that person internally that can kind of, teach you, mentor you, however you want to, do it. And then have fun and work for a product that you think is like something that, you want to tell your friends about, that it's super cool, and, and that you love it and you believe in it. So I think like that's the key thing.
Yeah. And that's great advice, especially for someone like me who's going to graduate soon. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So honestly, I could ask you so many more questions.
Yeah.
So before we get to the fun questions, I do want to shift to, you're a public speaker for you've talked in front of so many crowds, big crowds, huge companies. I'm interested, did you ever have a fear of public speaking? And for those who do, what would you tell them? Like, how do you get over that fear and kind of just go into it?
So, I mean, I was always a pretty social person, and I never wanted to public speak. I would not articulate that, but I remember having to even go up in front of, a class when I was in school and thinking, oh my God, like I would just be so nervous about it. And so, the quick story on that was that I kept getting asked to come and speak. And I thought, it's going to be really good for the company to sort of get the word out about the company. And so I should probably go do it and just kind of, put my big girl undies on and, and just like go out there and do it. But I was, super nervous about it. So I spent, a couple months putting a pitch deck together of like sort of what I wanted to say, and went out and did the presentation, and it was in front of, I think, 100 people, and it went pretty well. But I remember, like, I didn't want anybody I knew in the audience. Like, I was just like, in case I just make a complete ass of myself and and like end up like, freezing and then crying off the stage or something. Like, I didn't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah.
And so but I got through the presentation. It went fine. And so I remember coming back to the office that day, and I said to my husband, was like, oh, how'd the presentation go? And I was like, describing it just how I did to you. And he said, well, what do you think was like, what was making you the most nervous? Was it the people in the audience? I said, no, it was like, I felt like once I got there, the people that had asked me to speak they didn't really like they didn't describe the audience the way that I would describe them. And so I felt like there were a lot more of these type of people. Like I did know a couple of people in the audience, and they were more like these kind of people. And I felt like I was kind of wedded to this deck that I had done because I had, memorized this presentation, and I was just going to like flow with it. And it really wasn't I've always felt like I was pretty good at reading audiences. And so I just didn't have freedom to kind of go in and just kind of hang out and sort of, talk a little bit and whatever. And I remember him saying to me, like, well, so why do you need to do a presentation? And I'm like, because you have to do a presentation. Like that's what you do. Like you're asked to present, and you have to, and he was like, well, can't you just get up there and sort of know what you're going to be talking about? And then you could sort of change your presentation along the way. I mean, maybe there's a few slides, but maybe not. And I'm like, that's interesting. So the next week, actually, somebody had been in that audience, and they called and they were like, hey, we were wondering if you do this talk. And, I'm like, I just don't have time to put a presentation together. And they're like, oh, there's no presentation allowed. And I was like, wait, what? Like, and they're like, yeah, you get up there there's like 400 people. It's called, I think it was Startup Grind. You have to get up there and you talk about, your company and for a half hour, and there's no presentation. You need to go up and sort of tell your story and whatever. And I was like, okay, well, I guess so. And I remember the day that came, I was so much more nervous for going and doing that, because I thought, like, I don't know these people, whatever. And then I got there about a half an hour early, and I sort of like watched the audience and kind of was trying to sort of size up kind of who I was talking to. Yeah. And then I got up there, and it was one of my best talks, like ever. And I loved it. I was free to do it. I knew my story, backwards and forwards. And so I got back, and of course I wouldn't allow anybody I knew to be in the audience yet. And so I said to my husband, I was like, he's like, how was this talk? I was like, it was so much better. And he's like, is it because you're getting more experience? I said, no, I think it was that I didn't have slides. Like I felt like I was so confined, to the slide thing. And so, since then people would call me and ask me to do a talk, and a few people would say you have to have slides. But most of the people I would say, I'll do it. I'm free on those dates on, but I don't do slides. And so it's funny because I've actually converted like entire conferences to no slides, because I really am such a huge believer when people go up there with slides. So much of the time, it is like it's just not who they are. They don't speak to, it's not like having a dialogue or a conversation. It's you, and over and over again. I mean, I think like the one thing that comes out of my talks is, she's super authentic. She just like, says like warts and all, you see exactly kind of what's happened, and I generally know what I'm going to be talking about. And, if there's a, a talk on sort of building a company, or there's a talk on fundraising or whatever, I always ask like 2 or 3 points to hit on. But, people never really describe audiences the way that I would necessarily describe audiences. I wouldn't say like, oh, it's a bunch of undergrads from Stanford. Like for me, I would want it, like I would look and try and figure out like, there looks like there's a bunch of athletes in the room. Like, are they, I'd ask at the beginning, like, that I never asked that question either, but I'm, I've had 500 people in the audience, and I'm like, how many have ever had a failed startup? And people, and it starts to break the ice, because then people look around and say like, oh, I'm not the only one here. Or, there's people like me. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to especially talk to you, but I'm going to come back to you in a little bit. Like, how many people think that they can't, raise a family while starting a company, and, have heard that, and people like raise their hand. And again, like, it's just, I think it's being able to have like a dialogue, and then, more and more people sort of realize that that's what makes a great presentation, whether it's me or somebody else. It's like, it's just your ability to sort of like, connect with the audience. And for me, I think that these PowerPoint presentations are just like, I don't know, maybe there's 1 or 2 slides that you like ultimately have to show sort of like, a visual on, but ultimately I think it's just way better for everybody if you're actually telling your story and hitting on certain points.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those points, just like the no slides and even talking to the audience, I think what you said, it like breaks that barrier of like the speaker versus audience. And like, it feels like you're having, it almost, you kind of create this like one-on-one conversation in a way. And I think that's like probably what makes a presentation most effective. So
no, I think it's super, super huge.
Yeah, so that's really cool.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now to the more fun questions. We'll do 2. First, what's a passion or hobby that you have that's completely unrelated to your work?
Passion or hobby? I mean, I hike. I would say that for me, I think it's something like I couldn't live without. Like I get out every day, and that's, I typically have my dogs, with me as well. But for me, it's like, it's something that, is really, really key. And even if I go and, bike ride or do anything else, for me, like a hike is really, really critical. So that's super key.
I like that. And then for the last one, so what is a weird or fun talent that you have that no one else really knows about? And so I'll go first.
Okay.
So what I've been doing is, so I'm fairly good at throwing blueberries or grapes into the air and catching them. And it's a little bit easier when someone else is throwing it to me, but it's only me here, so I'll do it. Okay, so we'll see how this goes. So here's a blueberry. All right. There we go.
Wow. And when did this start?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. When I was little, I guess I always just liked to do it. And then actually in high school, I had a friend and we would throw grapes to each other in lunch. And I could throw when I say I've thrown it pretty much like a basketball court, far distances into my mouth. I don't really know how it started, but it's a fun little talent. So yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't know about a talent. I mean, I think people are all, I used to, when I was really little, I used to twirl the baton.
Oh,
and so I still have my original baton and I still take it out every once in a while. And people are like, how do you know how to do that? It's so crazy that you were
Yeah, and I didn't have time ultimately. Like I ended up focusing on gymnastics, so I just never did it. But the fact that I took private baton lessons.
Oh, cool.
I was like super into like baton and stuff. So yeah, so I think it's just, I mean, my kids in particular just like laugh when I like run across it. I'm cleaning closets out and I run across it and they're just like, oh my God, I cannot even believe that that you've got your baton. So
I love it. That's great.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I think, that's probably the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Well, Kara, I've absolutely loved this and I've learned so much. So really, thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks for reaching out, Carly. I really appreciate it.